Hi, this is Unsuitable with Mary B. Safrit, the podcast where I interview single Christians about their lives and faith. Here we are at episode 8. Welcome. Today I'm sitting down with Cristina Spataro. Cristina is a Bronx-native. She is a child psychotherapist and she loves old movies. You're going to hear stories from Cristina about growing up in the Bronx, growing up with physical challenges, advocating for yourself and others in relationships, how difference builds empathy, and the value of limitations. I particularly appreciate how honest Cristina is about some really challenging experiences. So, without further ado, here is my conversation with Cristina. Hi, Cristina. Welcome.
Hi, Mary B. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you for being here. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Me too, very excited.
For a lot of reasons. One of which being you are actually a native New Yorker.
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it was a unique thing until I started coming to Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan because I'd grown up in the Bronx. I was born, raised there my whole life. So most of the people I grew up with, most of us were native New Yorkers. So it wasn't until I started coming to Manhattan that, I'd go to like these functions, be like, how long people have been in New York? 5 years, 10 years. And I'd be like, since birth. Like it's, so many people come here like to make their mark and, that whole Frank Sinatra song, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere.
Right.
But for me, there never was that thing. My mother gave birth here. So pretty much she gave birth, she stayed, I stayed. And then, my whole life was here. I went to college here, then I got a job here. So it wasn't like I had a grand design. Yes, I'm going to make my mark. It's just... this is my hometown.
Kind of what happened.
Yeah, this is my hometown.
So you grew up in the Bronx.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that experience, maybe of like community and relationships up there?
The Bronx is interesting. Like everybody talks about, like some people who have come to New York, who've moved here, talk about like the energy of the city signs it's like too much. I mean, the Bronx is still part of New York, or people don't always realize that. There are 5 boroughs in New York.
Yes.
It's not just Manhattan.
Right.
It's the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island, and Manhattan make up the 5 boroughs.
Right.
So the thing is, I noticed the energy in the Bronx is different from Manhattan. It's not that same intensity. We have a different intensity. We got some intensity.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think anyone would doubt that the Bronx is an intense place.
Yes, but it is different.
But it's a different, it's a different,
it's a different vibe. And then sometimes even like if I'm going someplace like Times Square, sometimes I even find that a bit much.
Yeah.
So it is a different sense. And then also just a lot of the people there, usually a lot of them are native New Yorkers or kind of just, so again, it's a little less of like, I'm some big potentate who's now traveling to Manhattan, or I'm some big mogul. It is a different feel, different vibe, although you have ordinary people in Manhattan too.
Yeah.
But it is different. I think you maybe get a little bit more of that international. Although what I love about the Bronx is it's so multicultural. I remember when Redeemer was having like this was several years ago, they were having these things on like multiculturalism and understanding other cultures. Because, a lot of people who were going to Redeemer were from Manhattan or from like this maybe a specific socioeconomic group. But I grew up in the Bronx.
Right.
So I actually wasn't as from that group as other people. So like my elementary school classes, my junior high classes, just people of all cultures everywhere. And I loved that. So I grew up in this wonderful place where I could just know people from all kinds of different backgrounds. And it was just enriching to me.
Yeah.
And then also, I am Christian. I do believe in Christ. But at the same time, I recognize that there are other people with different beliefs and stuff that I have.
I think that's the great thing about probably for you growing up in a place like the Bronx, or, I mean, I have friends who grew up in Queens, which is the most diverse place on earth.
Yes, they say if you ride the 7, you pretty much will see every culture within that ride from top to bottom. Absolutely.
So, like, growing up surrounded by that, obviously it's not, the neighborhoods aren't immune to this sort of prejudice and hate just because they're diverse. But I think that there is, a benefit to growing up being surrounded by people who would, in other parts of the country, be qualified as an other.
Yes, exactly. Because, I really feel like God doesn't want there to be an other. He really wants all of us. And that's really the whole message of it. That he really wants us all, like, because maybe even Jesus even said, when Jesus made the message in terms of basically calling people out who he felt were hypocrites. Like they were going and they were claiming and all to, like, be religious and follow the rules and the laws. But at the same time, he saw the hypocrisy. And that whole parable of, like, the Good Samaritan and all that. The whole idea of that being that you're not above anybody else.
Yeah.
You're not. Yes, God is above you, but you're not above anybody else.
Well, and God is above you, but Jesus came to our level, right? Became a man.
Exactly.
And so we really have no excuse.
We have zero
even though
excuse.
I do it all the time.
Exactly. And
right?
he was actually
we really have no excuse.
willing to give up his power, willing to give up so much to show his love.
Yeah.
So if he's willing to do all that for us messed up people, then why are we so unwilling? Or why do we find it so hard to let go a little bit of that pride and judgment to invite people in?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you've spoken a little bit about prejudice just now, and difference, right?
Yes.
You had, growing up, kind of this experience of feeling a little bit different.
Yes. Well, to lead back to your wonderful series on unsuitable, I basically felt unsuitable, or you had made a definition where you said to feeling like we're not fit in, or that we're not, that somehow we don't belong.
Right.
You kind of, equated it with that. And I definitely felt that way because, when I was born, I was a premature baby. So I was very lucky because it could have been worse, but I was deprived of oxygen for a brief period. And in that time, I did suffer damage that resulted in having motor issues with my entire left side. So it affected my walking. It affected the appearance of my hand because I have this hyperextension because I have something called cerebral palsy. So basically that's where, I have muscles that are like fused, that I have a hard time moving because the part of the brain that would say, do that, was affected. Yeah. So then you have other muscles that kind of took over. So I have like this hyperextension in my hand, or I have like a permanent double joint in my hand, in my left hand. So people will look and say, that's really cool. How do you do that? And I'm like, this is not by choice. Right. Pretty much this is the resting state of my hand. Yeah. So I did not choose that. And because, although, like I said, I'm very grateful because there are people with CP who have been in wheelchairs, and because it affects the motor skills, the motor ability. Some people can't speak well. Aside from my lapses as I'm trying to think of what to say, as you can see, I can speak. But some people with it actually does affect the ability to produce speech. So like I have a friend where they are very intelligent, but because of that, they have a hard time getting the words out in a way that most people find appropriate. Right. So they will all not see that there isn't a cognitive issue there. It's a motor issue. Right. So that's been part of, and I always tell people God gave me enough of a touch to sort of be aware of stuff, but not enough to really impact what he wanted me to do with my life. Yeah. But it does make me notice stuff. Like it makes me notice how certain buildings are not handicapped accessible. Yeah. How even when they have a railing, it's designed in such a way that if you actually have to use the railing to climb the steps, it's not too convenient to do that. Yeah. Or like the little ledge there between the door and the steps is too close. So if I'm using the railing to climb up, I can't kind of open the door and still hold the railing without knocking myself in the head, which kind of defeats the whole purpose. Yeah, absolutely. So, absolutely. What do I do with this? Yeah. So when I was younger, it was very hard for me because you don't want to be different. Yeah. You want to be like everybody else. Right. And even though I did grow up in this very multicultural environment, most of the people I grew up with had, 2 capable legs. Right. And didn't struggle walking. So if a friend had a rooftop birthday party with a narrow staircase, it wasn't a big deal. It was cool. But for me, it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I either had to figure out a way to get up there, petrified as I'm climbing this thing, or bag out on the party. And especially when you're a teenager, that stuff is hard because you worry so much, well, what will people think of me, or I'm not like everybody else, when I won't be accepted. And there really is, especially when you're a younger teenager, you want to be accepted so badly. You want to be normal so badly. And it's funny because in my work, I'm a child psychotherapist. And so many of the kids I work with, I ask them how they're feeling. So I feel normal. I'm like, I just have to object to that word. There's no such thing as normal. Right. We all are whoever we are. Right. But I want to know how you're feeling emotionally. And so, but that's really what it is when you're younger. You want to feel normal, quote, like everybody else. And so when something doesn't make you feel like that, it's hard. So I always felt my whole life unsuitable. Like I didn't fit in anywhere. Yeah. Like I didn't belong. And it was weird because my disability wasn't as severe as others. I didn't really fit in anywhere because I had for a while, they had me doing a special bus with a matron because the bus steps were hard for me to climb. But some of the kids I rode the bus with were much more like cognitively and physically impaired than I was. And then I was in a regular classroom with children who didn't have any physical issues. So it was this weird in-between where I didn't fit in with the kids with the quote disabilities, but I didn't really fit in with the kids who, so I didn't know where I fit. Yeah. And it was really, really hard. And especially when I was younger, I felt very self-conscious. I really felt like I didn't belong. I was totally unsuitable. I was like this weird person. And I was extremely shy, and it was really hard for me in relationships. I mean, I was very grateful there were people who, were kind and sympathetic as I struggled with things. But a lot of times I did feel very alone, very lonely. And as I got older, I think one of the benefits of getting older, of not being a teenager, of, being over 30. I think one of the benefits of that is you get comfortable in your own skin in a way that you're not when you're younger. You still want to fit in, but it's not this, oh my God, what if this person doesn't like me or that happens? And you still feel bad, but it's different. You kind of have this wisdom that kind of comes in here. Like, all those adults that told you when you were 16, sweetie, this will pass. You rolled your eyes at them saying, what do you know? Right. And then when you suddenly older, you're like, oh my God, they were right. This wasn't the end of the world. Yeah, right. I thought it was, but apparently it wasn't, because you start to realize there are actually other problems in life that that aren't as terrible, and there are other problems in life that are worse. Right. So this problem you're having, it's not the worst that's going to be. Right. And but you can't see that because also from a developmental standpoint, they've done the research. Right. When the kids are when you're in your teens and even early 20s, you're I think the frontal lobe is not completely developed. Right. There's still issues with planning and seeing consequences, and there's still a level of impulsivity, which explains why a lot of people who are teenagers will do. I'm not saying now there's still a lot of wonderful, fabulous, responsible teens, but they will more likely tend to be more impulsive on things because there isn't that planning understanding isn't fully developed yet. So there is a developmental aspect to that. But it is interesting. You do kind of see and I find as I'm older, I'm more able also to be more of a self-advocate for myself, where when I was younger, I was so afraid to draw attention to the disability. So I either would pretend it wasn't an issue or avoid something. And now I'd be like, you know what? Let people know that's going to be a problem for me. Is there a way I can get help with that? So I'm much more of a self-advocate now than I was when I was younger. Yeah. But that doesn't mean I don't still have my moments where I feel unsuitable. I mean, this world, this media, if you don't fit into the cookie cutter mode and look, you start to wonder, well, who am I? Do I fit in? Am I really suitable?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a lot of interesting points there. As far as learning to advocate for yourself in your relationships, and in just going about in life, because New York is not the best place for someone who has physical challenges in a lot of ways. I mean, there are, just because the buildings are so old and the code requirements for keeping things like ADA, up to date with all of the ADA, regulations. It's just different. If there's, you obviously know a lot more about this than I do, as I'm trying to stumble through an explanation of this, but just, the way New York is, there's, a lot of the subway stations don't necessarily have elevators.
That is true. And the ones that do aren't working.
The ones that do aren't working. And, it's just, it's very difficult.
It is.
But at the same time, you were talking about people who would invite you to these rooftop parties and not necessarily think about how difficult it would be for you to get up and down, and then putting you in the position of having to say, actually, that's going to be really hard for me.
Right.
There's like this element, I think, of in relationship, how willing are we to be inconvenienced for each other?
Yes, exactly.
And have to alter our plans for the benefit of someone else.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think people intentionally are selfish and uncaring. I think people just don't think of it.
Right.
I think the same thing with the buildings. I think New York is not bad in terms of a lot of buildings are handicapped accessible, but I feel like a lot of it has to do with who is going to be in that building, who are they going to be servicing, who's involved with it.
Right.
Like I said, unless people have experience with something or really thinking about it, I don't think it touches them. I mean, it won't.
Right.
It won't. Like I tell people all the time, I've been touched in this way, so I will notice things people won't.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Constantly. And people just don't think about it.
Yeah.
And my heart is so touched because when a friend actually does consider that, like I don't even have to, like some of my really close friends, I don't even have to mention it to them anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Like they get it. And I love that so much. Like I got together with a friend the other week and they were going to go to this restaurant, this Indian restaurant. And you know how some places, like you have to go down like these stairs and all that?
Right.
So my friend actually asked the group, well, are there stairs there? Because, Christina might have a hard time. And I love that she asked that.
Yeah.
I love that I didn't have to ask that.
Yeah.
That she knew me, loved me, and didn't want me to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of relationships is learning to advocate for each other, is being an advocate for each other. So you're not consistently putting that friend in the position of having to have that same conversation over and over and over again. Exactly. I mean, like if you think about, I have a friend who, several friends who have food allergies, which is, you have to think about when you're making plans, like, okay, is there going to be something on this menu that so-and-so can eat?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I think it breeds a different level of empathy for you to experience those limitations, but also to be around people who have different limitations from you, because we all have certain limitations. I mean, mostly, right? It is also a bit of a privilege issue, right? Having physical disabilities or physical challenges, versus being more able-bodied. And so to have those relationships where your friends are having their eyes open to this whole other set of complications that they aren't necessarily aware of all the time.
Right, absolutely.
Is part of, I think, a really good thing that relationships and community can bring about.
Yes, I agree. And I think part of that is just being vulnerable with each other. Yeah. Letting each other know what we need. Yeah. And just having forming these relationships. Yeah. So that we don't feel like we don't fit in, that we're unsuitable, that, the realizing that we all have our own individual differences. Right. And we all are unique in God's eyes. Right. And I think that's another part of it too. Like where I would see any differences I had as, oh, why can't I just be like everybody else? And then I realized, but I am loved by God. I am made by Him. Right. So I am not unsuitable. Right. I am part of this tapestry of humanity that has so many different layers and people, and just to embrace that. Yeah. That we're not all supposed to be the same. It'd be pretty boring if we were. Right. You know, like there was a Twilight Zone episode where the whole premise of it was there was this society where they actually made everybody had to be the same.
Yeah.
And there was one girl that fought against it and wanted to stay different.
Yeah.
And in the end, they got her. But the whole point is, how boring a world is that?
Yeah.
Where we'd all be the same? Do we really want that?
Right. Well, and it's, you know, as Christians, as Christ followers, especially, I think we have to think about how are we defining unsuitable?
Exactly.
Right? Because we're not looking at it through Christ's eyes. Oftentimes we're defining it through worldly eyes.
Exactly.
And worldly eyes define unsuitable as, or suitable, I should say, as power, as privilege, as, you know, looking a certain way,
absolutely.
fitting the whatever we think the ideal is. And so anything that falls outside of that, we define as unsuitable. And yet in the kingdom of God, those are the most suitable.
Yes.
The ones who don't have the power,
Yes.
the ones who are not, you know, in the eyes of the world suitable.
Yes.
Right? That's, you know,
Yeah, exactly.
I think that there's like a really powerful way of experiencing God's grace when we come up against our human limitations, that if you don't have that limitation, you don't necessarily experience in the same way.
It's true. It's true. And I think he wants us to have those challenges because he wants us to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
You know, we definitely have our time in the desert where we're struggling. And he wants that because sometimes when we have struggled and we have gone through things, it makes us richer human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And richer in the non-monetary sense.
Right.
But
Spiritually richer.
right, exactly.
And psychologically richer,
Yes,
emotionally, mentally.
exactly.
Yeah, got it. Absolutely. So was there a particular moment, or was it just kind of a gradual thing for you stepping into this sense of advocating for yourself, this sense of worthiness, this sense of, I mean, I'm sure it's something that we all have to continue to do daily, but it seems like there was a point where you kind of turned a corner, or at least started advocating for yourself more in this.
I think growing up did that.
Yeah.
I think pretty much growing up did that. I think, you know, I mean, I think God has always been constantly redefining me.
Yeah.
And making me braver as I go. Because I was so shy when I was younger, and so apologetic. I was practically apologizing for my existence. If somebody stepped on my toe, I'd apologize for my foot being in the way. I mean, it was just this constant sense of feeling like there was something I was unworthy, I was wrong. And I think, well, a big part of it was my beloved late mother. She was always very loving, very devoted. She made me feel like just so loved and so wanted. And anytime I was down on myself, she would be right there to say, no, honey, I love you just the way you are. Yeah. So I feel like that definitely helped deal with those growing pains. And I think getting older, and I think also having to deal with her illnesses because she became ill.
Right.
And then I had to deal with many years of that. So I think that unfortunately did define me in many ways because then my life became about, I'm dealing with life and death, literally. I'm dealing with the person I love more than anything in this world struggling. So she wasn't my strong, independent mother anymore. She was a woman who was struggling with severe illness, and I had to be strong for her. Yeah. And in learning to be strong for her, I learned to be strong for myself.
Wow. Yeah, it's so cool how you were able to turn the tables where you had, it sounds like you had a series of relationships, you know, kind of growing up where there were people coming alongside you. There were people who were kind and empowering for you. And then when you were in a position where you got to be the caretaker, you were able to then return the favor, as it were.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I have to also say working with kids in trauma did a lot of that too. Because then I would work with kids who had tremendous problems, like really hard lives. I mean, the one thing is now when people complain about little stuff, and everybody has their limit of what they can handle, but I'm always like, really? That's your biggest problem. I have a 5-year-old who's coping with more stuff than you are. Like, get a grip. So I think the combination of working with kids in trauma, of dealing with my mother's illnesses, I think they all kind of happened at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I really, I was doing my heavy trauma work around the same time my mom started having health issues.
Okay.
So the two things kind of happened at the same time. So it forced me to grow up a lot.
Yeah.
It really did. I mean, I was getting older chronologically, but it definitely forced me to grow up.
Yeah.
And see the world differently. And yes, and like you said, return the favor, because now this amazing woman who basically was always there for me, I had to figure out a way to make this work for her, and that was not easy.
Yeah. Well, and for the kids that you work with as well, kids who are vulnerable in some way, being able to be that voice for them.
Yes.
That hears their trauma, hears their struggles and their worries, and provides them with that, being an advocate for them in the sense of, I'm here for your emotional and mental and spiritual well-being.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I absolutely. So as being an advocate for them and for my mom, I had to learn to speak up. So when you speak up for people, you start speaking up for yourself.
Yeah.
It kind of goes together. Absolutely.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing I've noticed in myself as well, is that being introverted myself, and I don't necessarily, I get really uncomfortable having to speak up for myself, but if I have to speak up for someone else, I'll do it in a heartbeat.
Of course.
Right? It's like, no, make this accommodation for this person. This is my friend who I want to take care of, who I care for, who I love. And so it's nice that kind of seeped into your self-esteem and your self-worth as well.
Yeah.
That you are a person who is worthy of having things accommodated for you, right? Because that's, I think about the parable, like the different parables of like the lost sheep and the lost coin, and that Christ is the one who's going to go after the one sheep. He's going to go after the one coin. He's going to go out of his way to like heal this man who's on the side of the road, who's screaming for Jesus to heal him. And everyone's like, be quiet, don't bother him, don't leave him alone. But Jesus goes to that man. You know what I mean? I think there's such a power in getting to a place where you have that sense of worth.
Yes.
That is worth fighting for.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think it's great when you can get to that place. I mean, don't get me wrong, I definitely have my moments.
Oh my gosh, yes, we all do.
And and it is hard when you are shy, when you are an introvert, there is that tendency to shut down.
Yeah.
There really is. Yeah. Especially when you're feeling emotionally threatened.
Yeah.
Like, I get that.
Yeah.
I get like that. I call it the deer caught in headlights.
Yeah.
Like, when people are coming at me.
Right.
And I'm feeling attacked.
Right.
I like shut down.
Oh yeah.
Shut down big time.
Oh yeah.
And sometimes people get mad at me because I'm not giving it back, and I'm like, you don't understand. I can't.
Right.
You can come in at me. I'm going to go further in.
Right. It's
you got to back off.
What is it? Fight, flight, or freeze.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's definitely that freeze.
Yeah. I totally get that. There's that kind of paralysis that comes over you because I probably shouldn't. I don't have a psychological background at all. So you're going to have to fact check me if I say anything that's incorrect.
It's okay.
But, I feel like for certain people, maybe if you're a little bit more empathetic or a little bit more sensitive, that kind of overwhelming, it just floods your brain, and your brain's like, nope, not doing this anymore.
I'm shutting down.
Nope,
you're
can't
not getting
deal with
anything
this.
else from me. That's it. I'm gone.
Yeah. I just think it's like really overwhelming for some people.
It is.
Your response is like, that's another way that we can accommodate for each other, right? Is if you know that about your friend, you're like, okay, I can't come at this person in that way. I need to like approach them.
This is not going to be helpful.
Right. For anyone. Right. Nothing about this is going to be productive.
Right. It's not going to be productive. I need to find a different tack, back off, because I'm not going to get what I think I'm going to get from this.
Yeah.
But it's funny because to do that, though, you need to have a little empathy. Some people don't always have empathy. I definitely think there are people, because they talk about emotional intelligence, and I think there are people that have an issue with that.
Yeah.
And don't necessarily have the empathy where they can really feel where somebody's coming from.
Yeah.
So I think they struggle with that, and they have a hard time being able to understand, okay, I need to stop this. Because some people can only think, oh, it's like that line from Mary Poppins. Some people, through no fault of their own, can't see past the end of their nose. And it's true. I'm a movie buff too, so sometimes I start quoting movies.
That's fine. That's great.
But I think it's true. Sometimes people have a hard time seeing past the end of their own nose. So they don't understand, and then it becomes almost like it's about them. But I need this from you. I need you to do this. But they don't understand that the manner in which they're forcing it at you is not going to get them what they want, and it actually is pushing you further away.
Yeah.
So they need to stop, but they don't know how to stop, and they want to keep coming at you and coming at you. So you know what? You keep doing that, I'm going to keep backing off, and you're going to get less and less what you want. Now, most of my good friends, people who've been there for me, they get that. But unfortunately, I definitely have had people in my life who did not get that. And their modus operandi was just to keep trying to attack me until I bent to their will. And that doesn't work on multiple levels. Number one, it makes me shut down. Number two, I am my mother's daughter, okay? I love my mother dearly. She was a very tough woman, very independent, very strong-willed. The surest way to not get what you want from her is to tell her she had to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the more you would force her, those little heels were going to dig in, and she's like,
well, I'm never doing this now.
I'm never doing it.
That's exactly, I feel that.
Yeah, even if what you're saying makes total sense, now it's so not happening. So that part I got from, so I think it's a combination of the introversion, me, having a hard time getting overwhelmed, and I think that other part of the part of my mother being like, nope, not happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you phrase it as not being able to see past the end of your nose. I mean, I know it's a quote, but you chose the quote, so we'll say you phrased it that way. It's interesting that you phrase it that way, because I think that there's also an element of an extreme lack of honest self-awareness in that as well.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And so you can't see past the end of your nose, but you also can't see deep within yourself.
Yes.
Right? And there's probably a lot of stuff in there that you haven't had to confront.
Oh, yeah. And there's, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I feel like that frequently when we find those kinds of dysfunctions where someone just cannot be empathetic, it's because there's something really deep in there that is just ingrained, and they are just taking it out completely unknowingly.
I think there is an unconscious element that I think it's psychological. I think is an unconscious element where there is something in there that they're dealing with. A lot of times it's fear-based, I think. I think it's their anxiety, it's their fear.
Right.
And they need this to happen in the way they need it to happen. Because it's a control thing.
Yeah.
It's a control thing.
Absolutely.
As you and I have discovered, we have zero control in this world.
Oh my gosh, yes.
No control at all.
No. Only the illusion of control over some things.
Yes. And that's the point. I love the way you say that. The illusion of control over some things.
Yeah.
So the problem is the world is pretty scary. So I think for a lot of people, if they feel like they can control what's happening, it gives them a sense of safety. But the problem is you can't. You can't control circumstance. You can't control people.
Yeah.
And the more they try to control it, and the more they can't, the more out of control they feel, the more anxious they feel, the more they try to grip and grab.
Yeah.
It's like a drowning person that's trying to drown the rescuer by holding on too tight and shoving them under the water.
Yeah.
You can't do that. But again, they don't have the self-awareness to fully understand it. A lot of it's unconscious. It's all this deep stuff they haven't really dealt with.
Yeah.
And so they're dealing with it, but not in a way that's going to benefit even them. But they don't see that.
Right, because that stuff's going to come out.
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's going to, your body and your brain and your heart, all of it, it's going to find a way to creep out one way or another.
Absolutely.
And so it's just a matter of, okay, can I, become aware of this so that maybe I can, make peace with it or channel it in a more effective direction.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think part of the problem is that people aren't even aware it's going on.
Exactly.
So you don't understand how to channel it and make peace with it because you're not aware it's going on.
Yeah. Yep. That's something that I've learned just as far as in my own relationships and in what my expectations for the people in my life are, for the people that I interact with are, because it can be very challenging. I'm just an obsessive overthinker. I just think all the time about everything and like every single little tiny thing. And so it's been an interesting process to accept that not everyone is like that. And in a lot of ways, that's a good thing. In some ways, that's a good thing that, not everyone is walking around as fretful as I am. But, yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to what we said, how we're all different.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We're all going to have different emotional reactions. And it goes back to what is suitable. Is my emotional reaction more suitable than yours? Or is your emotional reaction or your way of handling things more suitable than mine?
Yeah.
Or are both of our ways uniquely suitable to who we are and to who God made us? So that's really, I think, what we have to come to, that we have to respect and understand that we are different.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And it doesn't make us unsuitable.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here. Before we close out, would you tell me one thing that's hard and one thing that's great?
One thing that's really hard, as I alluded to before, is that I recently lost my beloved mother. And that has been so hard.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're 3 or 30. When you lose a parent, it is so primal.
Yeah.
And even though she'd been sick for a while and I was helping take care of her, my world became less safe when she left it.
Yeah.
My world got upended when she left it. And even though I have dealt with depression with clients, this is the first time I've had to deal with my own depression. And really had to deal with how crippling it can be, how devastating it can be. And you're not yourself.
Yeah.
And you try to go along and you try to live your life and you realize, I'm hurting.
Yeah.
And I have to just own it and deal with it. And sometimes society won't always let you deal with it because you still have to move on. You have to live, you go to work. But part of you doesn't want to. Yeah. Part of you is just, this is hurting so bad. And I've never felt pain like this in my entire life. It definitely, grief is something that comes at you with waves. I mean, this morning I was crying. I just had my moment where I was crying and crying. I nearly called you to say, I'm not sure I could do this today because I'm having a very emotional moment. But then I kind of came back and I was okay, I'm going to do this. And that's how grief is. It's just, it comes at you in waves and you start feeling it and you start feeling the pain and, you just have to deal with it. And it's hard. It's really hard. So that's the hardest thing that I'm going through right now. The best thing is I am very blessed to have wonderful friends in my life who have really been there for me during this time. They haven't judged me when I needed to just be in that place. Because sometimes I just needed to be sad. But at the same time, they've also checked on me and be like, how are you doing? What are you doing today? You're not just going to sit there and cry, right? You're going to do something else today, right? So they have been wonderful, supportive and encouraging and just, what do you need? And I'm there for you. And so while I'm dealing with this horrible pain, I've been very blessed to have really great friends that have just been there for me.
Yeah. Well, Cristina, thank you so much for sharing all of that and for being here.
And thank you for having me, Mary B. And thank you for whoever's listening to this. I hope you enjoyed it and you weren't wishing you were doing something else like listening to that audiobook you've been putting off. So I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it entertaining and I hope it helps you in some way.
Well, it definitely helped me.
Okay,
so
good.
Thank you for that.
Glad. You're very welcome, Mary B. Thank you for the time.
That's all for episode 8. Check back next week for the final interview of season 2. I'll be talking to Sean Oates about his experience growing up in a predominantly white community. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Cristina for her vulnerability and for trekking all the way to Midtown to record. Theme music is by Chad Rollinson and sound editing is by Andrew Kim. If you have any thoughts or want to engage on this topic further, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Or go to my website, marybsafrit.com. While you're there, feel free to subscribe to my newsletter. You'll get an email from me every other Wednesday with an exclusive message and direct access to content and resources I think you'll love. You can also shoot me a message by clicking on Contact Me. And you can always head over to Instagram and follow me at maryb.safrit. That's all for now. Check back next week for a brand new episode.